Good morning, everyone. It is amazing to see you all here today. I'm Mary Brooks, formerly at Oxford City Council and now Smart Energy Systems Director at Low Carbon Hub. Along with Aid from GreenTV, whose team continues to do all the really hard work here, I'm a co-founder of the EV Summit.
4 years ago, my now friend Mary Brooks, when she was a pathfinding leader at Oxford City Council, agreed to put on an electric car event. 4 years later, and the EV Summit has become arguably the most significant high-level business forum in e-mobility anywhere in the world.
We've always wanted the summit to facilitate real-world action and progress in the transition to e-mobility. We might be standing here in an Oxford University lecture theatre, but our speaker sessions are not lectures. They're about revealing insights and sparking ideas that you can develop in the networking spaces. So this year, we're getting back the energy and the atmosphere of having such an engaged audience here in real life. And because meetings can take place on our online EV Summit platform, we're bringing an even larger group together to spark and develop those new ideas, online and in person.
Thank you to everyone for being here, and particularly to those who've travelled far and wide and had to undertake burdensome COVID procedures. And of course, a special thank you to our sponsors, speakers and exhibitors, with particular thanks to, and there's a little bit of a list here, Hyundai, Polestar, LeasePlan, Arrival, Go With Flow, Greenflux, EY, Shell, Arup, Wood, DNV, Zaptec, Improved Corporate Finance, and to BCLP. Now that we're in our 4th year with the EV Summit, it's time to talk about the true purpose of the summit: to fast-charge the automotive sector on a pathway to decarbonisation.
That's right. The EV Summit is as much about decarbonisation as it is about cars, even electric ones. A lot has changed in the 15 months since the last EV Summit. Cars with a plug now account for over 17% of new vehicle sales. Volkswagen is now a leader in the sector with its ID3 and ID4. Hyundai has released its beautiful 800-volt architecture Ioniq 5, and the Polestar brand is rolling out worldwide.
Some things haven't changed, though. Toyota still seems to think the Prius is all the market needed, which I'm not entirely sure is correct. And while the battle for electrification has largely been won, a new challenge to decarbonise the supply chain and the manufacturing ecosystem of the automotive sector has only just begun. Historians tell us that a crisis accelerates the future, and front of mind for most of us right now is the COVID crisis. But perhaps the crisis that has led to the most significant change in the mobility space is not the COVID pandemic, but rather the climate crisis. The European Union's punitive CO2 emissions fines, the Johnson administration's banning the fast forward of combustion engines to 2030, and most recently the Biden administration placing climate change at the top of their agenda. These three variables are the real ones underpinning the change in the automotive sector. And as the climate crisis deepens, those drivers of change will only accelerate. So, to mark the inherent importance of climate to our purpose, we have this year introduced the climate stripes to our summit branding. Developed by Ed Hawkins at the University of Reading and based on real data, these stripes represent the change in temperature that we're seeing as a result of climate change. In just 2 months' time, what is likely to be the most globally significant COP will be happening here in the UK in my hometown of Glasgow. We hope that the discussion over the next 2 days will help to prepare and prime us for the coming months and years where businesses and governments will have to make bigger commitments than ever before to secure our future. But that's enough talk about climate change. Let's move on to the climate of change that is the solutions-oriented platform of the EV Summit. And talk of platforms is apposite. For the 2021 EV Summit, my EV Summit co-founder, Rashida Nooreh, has been building our own super powerful online meetings platform. A game changer in what is a hybrid online meets in-person event can be. A fully integrated video meetings, live webcast and partner platform, all built around a beautifully elegant proprietary software platform and a database built up of over 4 years of a significant community of e-mobility leaders. So, it's on with the show, and I am delighted to introduce your host for day one, Rachel Morrison.
Rachel is a reporter for Bloomberg in energy, climate and utility sectors, and she specialises in coverage of European energy markets and UK utilities.
Many thanks, Rachel, and over to you.
Many thanks for those warm words of introduction. I'm delighted to be presenting this year's EV Summit, as always a significant gathering of e-mobility leaders, but for the first time held as a hybrid event. Welcome to everyone joining us here in the Saïd Business School in Oxford, and also to our global audience watching online. I'm so excited to see this industry really taking off, and it's an area that's of huge interest to Bloomberg readers. With the UK's progressive 2030 phase-out target, we're in a good position to raise ambitions at the COP climate talks later this year. We've got a fantastic 2 days in store for you, and I want to say thank you in advance to all of our fantastic speakers, to our audience in attendance, online, and above all, to our sponsors. The EV Summit is always such a success thanks to your support and engagement. Of course, one of the biggest parts of the EV Summit is your chance to network. So please do take advantage of the breaks between panels to meet your fellow delegates, whether that's virtually or in person here in Oxford through our managed introductions process. As well as meeting other delegates, do remember to check out our exhibitors. Here in Oxford, we have the brand new Hyundai Iconic 5 and the Hyundai Kona. From EAV, we have their cargo bike. From Polestar, the Polestar 2, and a prototype van from Arrival, who are exhibiting in collaboration with LeasePlan. Then, for our online audience, you can find out more from all of those companies and also from Zero Light. So do check out the fantastic exhibitors wherever you're attending from. The EV Summit online platform has over 2,000 senior e-mobility delegates on there for you to engage with. So our first speaker is Tom Hayes. Tom is the Deputy Leader of Oxford City Council and the Cabinet Member for Green Transport and Zero Carbon Oxford. Tom is also a great friend of the EV Summit. Tom, may I welcome you to the stage?
Hello, and thank you for coming today and for your commitment to accelerating the transition to electric mobility. Where we meet and when we meet matters. We meet in Oxford, an old city, but an old city at the cutting edge of the enterprise and research which will decarbonise our world. Innovation is at the heart of Oxford's work to decarbonise and clean up our air. And we meet in a time of pandemic. Each of us is striving to meet the challenges created by coronavirus. The NHS is saving life, and our city's knowledge is lighting the candle at the end of the tunnel to show the way into that new world that we all so desperately want to enter. I hope you and your loved ones and your colleagues are all well after the months we've endured. This is one of the first gatherings face-to-face that we've had for a while, and I hope you all enjoy it. We also meet in a time of another global crisis, one which emphasises our interconnectedness and shared fates. As you've just heard, the climate crisis is not going away. It demands urgent action, and Knowledge Made in Oxford has shone a light on the scale of the challenge, as recent UN reports, partly authored by Oxford academics, show. But the climate crisis is also showing the need for actions and technologies that can decarbonise our planet, and this summit will show that. The knowledge generated at this summit, and because of it, will add to Oxford's contribution to meeting the climate crisis. We have been unable to join together for so long, so please do use and cherish this opportunity to meet in person and to enhance our body of knowledge. Each of us in our lives is doing what the science tells us we must do to protect life, moving at full speed with all necessary intensity of effort to overcome the virus. But, and I believe this is a challenge of this summit, can we all of us truly say that each of us and our organisations are moving at all necessary speed with all necessary intensity of effort to decarbonise transport? Certainly Oxford City Council, where I'm Deputy Leader, which is leading the way on this, is asking that question, that hard question of ourselves. Our Go Ultra Low programme is running a first of its scale trial of on-street EV charging. As the first city to trial a whole street of pop-up chargers, Oxford is also using private sector investment to secure rapid charges for taxis. We are supporting the conversion of sightseeing buses to become the city's first fully electric double-decker buses, and we're in line to become an all-electric bus city. Oxford's covered market is older than the political entity that is the United States of America, and like much of our old city, this historic marketplace is nonetheless embracing the future by going electric through new charging points and delivery vehicles. The city will soon become home to the UK's largest EV charging hub, thanks to Energy Super Hub Oxford. ESO is investigating how a very large battery can support the rollout of electric vehicle chargers to the public, as well as help the council to switch faster to EVs. In some parts of Oxford, there just isn't enough space in our electricity network to connect EV chargers and give them the full power they need to operate promptly. By adding ESO's battery, it can take electricity from the higher power national grid when there is plenty of availability and store it until it's needed locally for the electric vehicle chargers. A true game changer. Another game changer, Project Leo, is seeking to understand more about our electricity network and how it can cope with the increases in green technologies needed to get us to net zero. The wires and switches of the electricity network are designed for large centralised fossil fuel power stations that provide a consistent supply of electricity. But in the future that's emerging, we'll have a lot more decentralised sources of energy generation, such as solar panels, wind power and hydro, which are more variable as they can only supply power when the conditions are right. Project Leo is trying to understand how we can use our existing network much more efficiently to support this change while keeping the network safe and the lights on. Why do I talk about these two game changers? Well, partly because the EV Summit is the birthplace of both. We have a lot of learning as a local authority in collaboration with business, government, academia and more. If you'll pardon the Paralympics analogy, we've set goals, we've exceeded them, we've shown we're not afraid of the hard work as a council, and now we want to reach for the stars and go for more golds. We're on the lookout for our next super project. That's the same for the EV Summit. The City Council just needs to work with you. Equally, we're developing the Oxford Cable Gully Ox Gully, a low-cost frugal device with the potential of giving 8 million UK homeowners without a driveway access to the vibrant home charging market and developing EV charging sharing economy. Oxford Direct Services, who are in this room, needs investors to scale up this exciting opportunity, and they're in the room waiting to talk to you. So lots of opportunity, lots of real chances to decarbonise our transport on a faster scale. I just want to close by saying that words like pandemic and crisis can terrify, understandably. We've all gone through some horrific experiences in the last few months. We're all looking ahead to another crisis on top of the one we've just gone through. Our brains are wired to escape fear and find others. So when something feels enormous, something feels overwhelming, we want to stand together. We're wired to search for the action that offers hope. Together, we have a responsibility to define and express that hope. And we have a responsibility to take the necessary action. So, I want to thank you all for coming again. This summit is the ideal place to showcase your plans, to model success, and drive action across all the aspects of electric vehicle use that will be strategically important, particularly as Oxford seeks to become a net zero city by 2040, 10 whole years earlier than the government's national legal target. I'm excited for this summit, and I'm excited to see what emerges from it. Today is a hopeful day. Thank you for spending time with us and for spending time with each other.
Thank you, Tom, for those powerful opening words, and to Oxford City Council for your ongoing support for the summit. I know it's very much appreciated. So before we move on to the decarbonisation of mobility panel, it's sponsored by DNV, and before we introduce the speakers, here is a short video from DNV. Ultimately, the electrification of transport is all about decarbonisation and securing a more sustainable future. So on this panel, we'll ask, how is e-mobility driving forward the decarbonisation of mobility? And I would like to now introduce our 4 panel speakers. First, we have Jeremy Parks, who is Global Business Lead for Electric Vehicles at DNV, our panel partner and keynote speaker. We have Amy Stokes, Head of Mobility at Volvo Trucks for UK and Ireland. We have Paul Wilcox, Managing Director at Vauxhall Motors, and Ben Lawson, Vice President of Strategy Europe at Enterprise Holdings. Thank you all for joining us today. Throughout the EV Summit panels, we'll hear from each of our speakers and then hand over to Q&A from the audience. So please keep your questions coming in for our speakers throughout. For our online and live audience, please submit your questions for our speakers using the chat box next to the live stream on the EV Summit online platform. So let me introduce our first panel speaker, our opening keynote, Jeremy Parks. Jeremy is the Global Business Lead for Electric Vehicles at DNV, our sponsor for this panel. When Jeremy is not supporting customers with their transport electrification plans, you can find him walking with the family in the Wiltshire countryside or coaching mini rugby at his local club. Jeremy, please come up to the lectern to open up today's first panel at the EV Summit.
Thank you for that introduction. Some 400 gigatons of carbon dioxide. That's the carbon budget that we have. According to the recent IPCC report, the world has 400 gigatons of carbon dioxide left to spend in order to stand a likely chance of limiting global warming to the 1.5 degrees ambition set under the Paris Agreement. The world is burning through this carbon budget, and the Earth is burning as a result. From extreme heat events to unprecedented forest fires. Emissions must fall by about a half by 2030, but in our forecast, unfortunately, we predict that they only fall by just 9%, with the world having exhausted the 400 gigaton budget by this time. I'd like to spend a few minutes sharing with you some of the insights from our 2021 Energy Transition Outlook, which is published today, and the role that we see for electric vehicles in the decarbonisation of mobility. In our forecast of the most likely future for the world's energy systems out to 2050, we predict that energy demand will plateau from around the 2030s. The population and GDP will carry on growing, but there becomes a disconnect between that growth and the energy demand, largely due to the improved energy efficiency that we see within the world's energy systems. And the electrification of transport plays a huge role in that improvement in efficiency, with EVs being approximately 3 to 4 times more efficient than their internal combustion engine counterparts, and importantly providing a great opportunity to decarbonise mobility, a sector that contributes currently around a quarter of the CO2 emissions globally. By 2050, we see the number of vehicles on our roads increasing by approximately 60%, but those vehicles will emit approximately 40% less CO2. Today in Europe, a new EV will emit approximately half the CO2 of an internal combustion engine equivalent based on the existing electricity grid. And of course, as we get more and more renewables onto that electricity system, that condition will improve over time. There are 2 main aspects that we believe need to happen in order to decarbonise mobility. We obviously need to have more and more zero-emission vehicles on our roads, and we need to get the energy into those vehicles with limited or no CO2 emissions. On the vehicle side of things, we see improvements in the technology, battery energy density continuing to improve, and the cost of those batteries dropping by approximately 19% for every doubling of installed capacity, continuing to make EVs more and more compelling. So by around 2030, in our forecasts, in our modelling, we're predicting that the average passenger vehicle globally will have approximately 100 kilowatt hour battery, with those batteries being around the order of $50 per kilowatt hour, and the range of those vehicles being above 400 miles, leading to approximately 50% of new sales of vehicles being EVs by around 2032 for those passenger vehicles globally. It'll be even faster for 2- and 3-wheel vehicles, and then for commercial vehicles, that 50% mark being hit around 2040. In all sectors, we see battery electric vehicles as dominating, with hydrogen fuel cell electric vehicles only really playing a role for the commercial sector for perhaps 10% of those vehicles by the time we get to 2050. On the energy side of things, we forecast that the demand for electricity globally will double from today through to 2050, and by that time, approximately 70% of the electricity will be generated from wind and solar PV. Of course, you need to generate the electricity and get it into the vehicles. So in line with that huge expansion of variable renewables, there needs to be a huge expansion of charging infrastructure to get that electricity into the vehicles. We predict that in just the en route fast DC charging market, there will be an investment of the order of $150 billion that will need to happen over the next decade, and of course further into the future. We see vehicle to grid as playing a vital role in the energy system of the future, enabling the flexibility that will be needed in order to integrate both the demand from those vehicles, but also integrate the huge swathe of variable renewables coming onto the market. In summary, we see that the huge investment currently being channeled into EVs and their associated charging infrastructure, the fact that they are 3 or 4 times more efficient than combustion equivalents, their much lower impact on our planet, the flexibility they can provide to aid their integration, as well as that of renewables, results in EVs being a vital part of the energy transition, and one that will ultimately lower the cost of transport, improve grid reliability, and lead to the decarbonisation of mobility. However, despite this seemingly rapid transition, we still forecast that the global average temperature rise will reach 2.3 degrees by the end of the century. And I encourage all of us to take the opportunity of this summit to seek ways that we can work better together to accelerate the energy transition. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy. If you'd like to stay at the lectern for a couple of questions from the audience, please. First of all, I would like to ask you, with the challenge from the grid infrastructure being ready, how big a challenge do you see that as, and where do you see the responsibility for making sure that it's ready? Is it with transmission? Is it with distribution? Is it with, charging companies? Who should really be focusing on this?
Yeah, I think from the discussions and the work that we've done with many of the transmission system operators, particularly in Europe and some other countries around the world, from a transmission system perspective, largely the grid should be able to handle the demand for energy for the electric vehicles. However, as you get down the distribution system and get closer and closer to the granularity where the cars will be operating, there are certainly going to be challenges involved. Connecting grid connections to some of the high-powered charging locations will be one of those challenges, and indeed managing the timing and variability of the load that will come on the system from electric vehicles will be require significant investment and mitigating measures at the distribution level.
Thank you. And a more sort of general question is, will the electrification of mobility happen in time to keep global warming below 2 degrees by 2050? And how can we accelerate this shift?
Yes, unfortunately, from the modelling that we've done and the forecast that we've made, it isn't going to happen rapidly enough. So we do forecast a rapid transition to electric vehicles, but the final outcome that we make in our energy transition outlook is one in which the global temperatures rise by 2.3 degrees by the end of the century. So we definitely need to seek areas where we can accelerate that transition. I think some of the work that many of the organisations involved in this summit are doing in order to make the vehicles themselves more and more compelling, scaling up the manufacturing facilities, scaling up the battery production, driving down the cost of the vehicles themselves, and of course the investment in the charging infrastructure and the connection to the grid are the areas that need to be continually accelerated to achieve that transition faster.
Oh, and I think Aid has a question too.
So with your warming prognosis of 2.3 degrees, which is obviously way above the 1.5 degrees that we're aiming towards, do you foresee that delivering positive change with further policy shifts and further levels of investment in the sector?
I suppose what we've aimed to do is forecast the most likely future for the energy system. So we're trying to take into account the anticipated shifts in policy towards carbon pricing and other impacts. So hopefully it obviously raises the topic within many organisations' agendas and helps illustrate the most likely outcome under the future that we're predicting. And we would certainly be hopeful that both corporations and governments would take away some of those views and seek the areas where we can work to try and close that gap. But it will require more substantial change, because it is already our prediction of the most likely future. It's not our prediction of, if we just carry on doing what we're doing, that's where we'll end up. It is predicting a transition, a change that we anticipate will happen.
Thank you, Jeremy. We'll hear from you again shortly for a discussion with the full panel. Thank you.
Thank you.
So on to our next speaker, Amy Stokes, who is Head of Mobility at Volvo Trucks for UK and Ireland. Amy has worked in the area of low-carbon technologies for all of her career, most recently focusing on electric vehicles. She finds the challenge of driving the uptake of electric vehicles in the market fascinating, because there are just so many different elements to consider. Her motivation has always been to make a difference to people's lives and to ensure a sustainable world exists for everyone's children, including her own. Do start submitting your questions for Amy. And Amy, please come up to the lectern and tell us how you're doing things differently.
So good morning, everybody. Thank you for the introduction. I'm head of e-mobility at Volvo Trucks, which is a newly created role within Volvo. And this is only my 92nd day with the company. So not a huge amount of time to settle in and then be standing here addressing the EV Summit. But the e-mobility market is moving so quickly, and so are Volvo's ambitions for decarbonising road transport. And that's what I wanted to talk to you about today. So the European truck market is perfectly positioned for a transition to cleaner transport. 45% of all goods moved in Europe by road travel less than 300 kilometres. So that's within the range of both our medium and heavy-duty trucks that we have available at the moment on a single charge. So this makes them perfect for everything from regional haulage to construction to urban distribution. Just like this 16-tonne FL truck that we have in operation at the moment,
It's operating within DHL supply chain in London. And as completely zero tailpipe emission vehicles, they're not emitting any carbon or other harmful emissions, and that makes them perfect for operations in inner cities where air pollution and actually noise pollution are at their highest. And then if we look a few years ahead, we also see that electrifying long distance heavy transport will be possible too. So our aim is to start selling fuel cell electric vehicles in the second half of this decade. And so this will make long distances possible using hydrogen to generate that that energy required. So what are the barriers to getting this electric fleets? Right now, buying an electric truck requires a significantly higher investment than diesel. We are in a transition phase between fossil fuels and long-term sustainable alternatives, and we will see the cost of new technologies falling over time due to improved economies of scale. But we actually need to get the trucks out in the market now in order to achieve this. So government can do a lot to speed up this process, and we want to work with them to ensure that policies are introduced that make it easier for fleets to make the switch. So it's essential that government recognise some of the advantages electric trucks offer, such as allowing operators to deliver goods in the night, quietly in the centre of cities, plus encouraging their uptake through reductions in tax, along with incentives for the purchase of the vehicles, but also then incentives to charge them with renewable energy. Also, to allow the uptake of electric trucks, we need to ensure that charging infrastructure that's accessible for trucks is available. So this is both on the operating sites of our customers, but also en route. And so we need to develop that charging infrastructure, but also the industry needs confidence that that grid infrastructure and the energy is there to support trucks in the future. And this is something a concern I hear from customers very regularly about the investment required to develop that infrastructure to support their fleets. So we therefore want government to give their backing to the development of charging infrastructure, key thing being it's accessible for heavy goods vehicles, along with that ongoing consideration of the requirements for trucks in future planning for the energy system and our grid infrastructure. To kickstart this, just a few weeks ago, Volvo Group and Daimler Trucks and the Traton Group, which own Scania and MAN, signed a non-binding agreement to install and operate a high-performance public charging network for battery electric trucks across Europe. And the joint aim is to initiate and accelerate the build-up of charging infrastructure to enhance customer confidence in climate-neutral transportation. And this project will begin operations next year. At Volvo Trucks, we have set the ambitious goal to have electric trucks account for at least half of our European sales by 2030. And in simple terms, as a society, we have to make this happen if we're going to achieve anywhere near our global climate objectives. If you put a Euro 6 diesel truck and an electric truck side by side, the total climate footprint during the life cycle is nearly 6 times lower for an electric truck. But right now, electric trucks are still a niche product. To reach the elevation phase, we need to see increased demand and the volumes necessary for economies of scale, and subsidies will be necessary to achieve this. Without that, the transition will be significantly delayed. And so we must ensure that the industry and government work closely together to encourage fleets to make that switch. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. I'll just see which questions we have that have come in for you. So first of all, what infrastructure will need to be put in place to decarbonise delivery miles outside of large urban environments?
So we see, I mean, at the moment, it's really a focus on infrastructure at operating sites. The products that we have available, in general, will be used for operations during the day and returned to a depot overnight. So we need infrastructure at operating sites to charge those vehicles overnight. Look a few years ahead, we'll also start to need to see infrastructure on your major highways, and that's rapid charging infrastructure, so trucks can pull in to charge up quickly during a driver's break and that sort of thing. Really, it's very similar to cars.
That makes sense. And are government grants the answer to improve confidence in the electric truck sector?
Government grants are needed to overcome that price barrier that we have at the moment. It is a real challenge, especially when we're talking to customers today, to make that comparison between diesel and electric. And these are businesses at the end of the day, and they're looking at the overall cost associated with their truck fleet. So incentives are necessary. When we look across Europe, where we're seeing the greatest uptake of electric trucks is those countries where they've got greater incentives.
And also hydrogen is another possible fuel for this sector. How do you see those two kind of interplaying and overlapping perhaps?
So we see them, the two technologies working together. It's not one or the other. So we see battery electric for inner city, regional distribution and construction, and we see the role for hydrogen in your long-haul transport.
Interesting. Thank you. If you'd like to retake your seat, we'll speak to you again for the panel discussion. Thank you. So our next speaker is Paul Wilcox, who's Managing Director of Vauxhall Motors. Paul is a man with a passion for speed, be that riding on two wheels at the weekend or in making sure that Vauxhall is driving Britain towards an electric future as quickly as possible. So get your questions in for Paul before he races off. Paul, please come to the lectern and give us yours and Vauxhall's insights.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you for the time this morning. Let me tell you a little bit about Vauxhall. Obviously, Vauxhall, as a brand, we're obviously British. We're only selling in the UK, and we've been in the UK since 1903. But we're the only brand in the UK that manufactures LCVs solely, and soon to have a solar plant producing electric vehicles in Ellesmere Port. And we are today the #1 LCV manufacturer. So in terms of positioning, I think we have a position in terms of, obviously, a position to talk about electrification. But we are, within the group, we're on an accelerated pathway, and we pledge to be pure EV by 2028. So every product we sell in the UK will be full electric. But to make this transition possible, we need a frictionless, simplified environment to make it work. And if the masses are going to take adoption, then we need to, and to reach the decarbonation targets, we need to make some significant changes in the way the whole infrastructure changes. Obviously, as a society, we need to pollute less, reduce our carbon footprint, specifically in travel, and to improve urban air quality. Now, transport is the largest emitting sector of greenhouse gas emissions, producing 27% of the UK's total emission. And of this, nearly 20% is created by light commercial vehicles. Now, the UK van park has experienced huge growth in recent years, up by 59% since 2000. So the scale of commercial vehicle impact is growing. And the problem is, as a society, we want more choice in the goods that we buy. We want them ever faster. We want them delivered to our homes. And 16% of vans in the UK are now used for delivery or collection of goods. And this, as we all know, is showing no signs of slowing down. Our view is that if LCVs are part of the problem, they need to be part of the solution. But the good news is I think we're all on the right path. Last year's UK's fully electric van fleet grew to 15,500 vehicles, up from 3,800 in 2011. And although that's positive, it represents only a tiny fraction of the complete vehicle park of 4.2 million vehicles. So we need to drive adoption, and we need to start to accelerate fast. So what is Vauxhall specifically doing to help drive this? Well, the point is we're giving customers choice. Vauxhall today is the first brand to provide battery electric vehicles across the complete range. Both Combo, Vivaro and Movano are all electric. And we're removing one of the key barriers to adoption, which is range anxiety. With a range in excess of 200 miles, we think range anxiety will soon be a thing of the past. And this is especially for van operators, as more than half of van journeys in Great Britain take place within a 15-mile radius. And even vans that travel nationally typically cover an average of 101 miles a day, well within a range of one of our LCVs. And we're moving further forward in terms of further investments. For example, solid-state batteries, which we expect to have in place by 2026, which will make our vehicles more sustainable, go even further and quicker to charge, and that's within the next 5 years. And we're making huge strides. And fleet customers are already seeing the benefits of an e-LCV. British Gas is the UK's third largest fleet operator with 12,000 vehicles, and it's already ordered 3,000 new all-electric Vauxhall Vivaro models with a plan to electrify its complete fleet by 2025. But we need to go well beyond the early adopters to the wider LCV community. And we need to do this quickly. But to do that, we face many challenges. As a business, our products are removing range anxiety. The next challenge is to address charging infrastructure. And it needs to be as simple to top up an EV as is an ICE vehicle. But the ratio of plug-in cars and vans per public charging device has actually risen in the last few years. 2015, it was 15-1. This year, it's 21-1. And the EU recommend 10-1. So we've got a long way to go in terms of driving the infrastructure. So we need to improve access. Forecasts suggest the zero-emission capable new vehicle car market will require 1.7 million car chargers, public charging points by 2030 and 2.8 million by 2035 at a cost of 16.7 billion. To put that in perspective, today we have 25,000 public charging devices in the UK. The government pledged 1.3 billion investment in the next 4 years, but that's never going to be enough to tackle the challenge. Vauxhall and its parent company Stellantis is investing 30 billion euros to drive our future in terms of electrification and to help our decarbonisation. The industry is moving, but we need as much ambition in terms of infrastructure to drive greater levels of adoption. To give drivers the confidence to switch, we need to mandate the provision of EV charging points in new build housing nationwide today. But also, we need to do that in terms of off-street parking, and that needs to be part of the discussion as well. And we would argue that there needs to be a joined-up strategy within government to drive developers to support the local investment required in terms of on-street charging. Now, ELCVs are more costly to manufacture and therefore to buy today. But the running costs are exceptionally low, and we will continue to focus on communicating the total cost of ownership benefits to customers, and we expect to get price parity within the second half of the decade as the technology improves. Until we do this, it is critical that we keep government support to incentivise customers to make the right choice. But we need to do this as simply as possible. The industry schemes to ease the financial burden, but 63% of car drivers have never heard of the plug-in grant, and 50% are unaware of EV home charging schemes. So grants are confusing, it's a burden for retailers, so is there another way? Well, we would argue we need to simplify the whole structure of incentivising the right choice. Changing the way we calculate vehicle excise duty and take all the levers that we have to ensure that there's no additional cost to the Treasury, but to drive that performance. So simplification is also needed in the way we go about tackling urban air quality. Clean air zones are brilliant initiatives, but the way they are implemented is inconsistent and confusing. We have congestion charging, clean air zones, low emission zones, and ultra-low emission zones, with varying schemes of implementation. We need a national policy for simplification to make sure it's clear to the benefits to take the right choice. Whether you're operating in London, Birmingham, or Bath, you don't have different schemes of operation. Now, there are lots of reasons for optimism. The eLCV market is growing fast. There are products customers want with the range that they need. As an industry, we need to keep communicating the overall proposition, and that's on us as the original vehicle manufacturers. As a society, we need to remove the barriers by simplifying the measures in place. Driving an EV is simple. Maintaining an EV is simple. We need to replicate that simplicity in a macro buying and a changing charging environments to accelerate customer behaviour. So simplification in customer charging, incentives and policies. Industry has faced many challenges over the years, and this is a very big one. We have what we need to get it right. The question is, how fast do we really want to go? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul. We've got a couple of questions that have come in for you. First of all, how can we change some of the negative perceptions about electric vans? So things like they're unreliable, you mentioned range anxiety, they're too expensive. How do you go about changing people's minds?
I think the first point is obviously we have some very large corporate fleets that are taking big quantities. We have, within the portfolio of customers we have, big fleets taking large volumes, and in terms of the level of satisfaction, extremely high. So once all operators see the performance of the product, the usability of the product, and I think similar to the problems we faced maybe 10 years ago with passenger cars, perception, will the range deliver the requirement? Then once we've over that hurdle, which say is the vans that we produce, for example, are well ahead of the daily needs of the vast majority of LCV operators, then I think we'll get that tipping point. So LCV, I think, will follow, like commercial vehicles, will follow the similar path that we had on passenger cars.
And will the rollout of EV charging points require a large-scale national scheme, or should it be focused at a local level?
No, I strongly believe it's an integrated strategy. Where charging has worked, if you look globally, it's come from a national, local, and an integrated strategy around obviously the complete ecosystem. But there needs to be a strong mandate and drive from central government. So if you look at where we've seen huge levels of adoption of electrification, so if you take Norway as a country, you look at Oslo as a city as an example, then you look at the strategy that was deployed, it was a completely integrated strategy from national to local, and all the partners, and using all of the incentives and inducements to consumers to take the right choice. And we're a long way from that today, in my opinion.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And now we'll hear from our final speaker, Ben Lawson, who's Vice President for Strategy Europe at Enterprise Holdings. Ben is driven by his young family, hopefully not literally, to create more sustainable mobility options that are not only better for the environment, but also provide free ice cream as well. So please start sending your questions in for Ben now. Ben, can I invite you up? Thank you.
Thank you. So, excuse me. Well, 5 minutes is a very short space of time to discuss this really incredibly important, but also very complex subject. So I spent some time thinking about which aspect should I discuss today. Should I do a wider introduction to Enterprise Holdings and our work in this sector? Most people don't know that we're the global leader in vehicle rental in all its forms, whether that be standard vehicle rental, car club, car share, flexi rent, supercar rentals, which they don't let me anywhere near, or the many other forms of our divisions. Or should I talk about the challenges and the opportunities to evolve our almost 2 million vehicles globally to zero emissions? That's much easier to do on some of the smaller vehicles, but as we're hearing today, we're beginning now to find lots of different ways to do that on the larger vehicles and then our refrigerated HGV trucks as well. But there are some amazing vehicle manufacturers and charging innovation people here, far more intelligent than I am, that will help us on that journey today. So should I talk about our work on the future of mobility to help reduce the number of vehicles on the road, making them more efficient and interoperable with other mobility modes? We know we can't just swap each ICE vehicle for an electric vehicle, as that won't help address the congestion issues in our towns and cities. We'll simply have our roads gridlocked by autonomous electric vehicles rather than their petrol or diesel derivatives. But I thought I'd focus on how we can help other businesses or municipalities on this journey. In times of tremendous uncertainty, how we can enable this journey flexibly and with minimal risk. So let me give you a couple of examples of how we do that today. Enterprise Car Club provides on-demand access to EVs for residents and businesses in hundreds of locations around the globe. In fact, when Highlands Council looked to reduce their emissions, we introduced a dedicated fleet of ultra-low emission vehicles to replace their older polluting fleet. With the technology we added, we then opened up these vehicles to the public for their own use outside office hours. And we recently added a mobility as a service platform in conjunction with GoHi, putting all of those vehicles on the same publicly available platform as bus, rail, bike share, scooter, ferry and other formats, all with an integrated ticketing and payment functions. Now, with further funding from the Scottish Government for much needed charge points in the area, we're now able to fully electrify that fleet, providing rural access to on-demand electric vehicles throughout the Scottish Highlands. Imagine taking the ferry by foot and picking up your electric car club on the other side to continue your journey. We also have a large electric LCV fleet, and we use telematics intelligence to show our partners which elements of their fleet can be electrified first and without causing increased downtime or productivity challenges. They're available by the hour, day, week, month or year, giving great flexibility for businesses to try, test, learn and progress down their decarbonisation path that is right for them. And it's great to see our public sector fleets taking the lead on decarbonisation. We're working with government departments on how they achieve their targets of 25% of days from January, but also to fully electrify by 2027. Now that's a huge challenge for departments that are focused on reducing central office working and moving to more remote working, where often lower charging infrastructure exists, and for many of those individuals, maybe no charging infrastructure whatsoever. So, if you're facing a decarbonation challenge, let's work on the plan that's right for you. Every business has a unique challenge that's creating different problems to solve. Every business would generate from getting tomorrow's technology today and at yesterday's prices to make that easier. We need to learn from each other's expensive trials and tests. You need the flexibility to move at your speed, the agility to change pace or direction, whatever you need to, and the partnerships to deliver on as broad or as narrow as a scope as you determine. So I hope that this summit provides you that, and I hope that we can be part of your journey. Thank you.
Ben, we've got a few questions for you as well here. So first of all, which country has the best charging infrastructure, and how easily could a similar model be implemented in the UK?
I mean, that's a fantastic question, and I think when we look at charging infrastructure, we look at it in multiple different ways. So we have the charging infrastructure that our customers need to feel good about that whilst they're using the vehicles day to day. And that also then falls into two camps. Our customers that are used to electric vehicles, so they have their own charging infrastructure at home, which makes it much easier, or customers that are looking maybe for how they're new to electric vehicles and how do they use it on the journey. But actually one of the things that is fundamental for us and how we can accelerate this decarbonisation journey is how do we, or the rest of our industry, provide enough charging infrastructure for our own vehicles. And that's very different from what we've heard about in different cases today, where vehicles can be charged overnight. When a vehicle comes back to us, we need to charge that vehicle very quickly and get it back out again to the next customer. And different countries are providing different solutions to that. Unfortunately, one of the great challenges is not the power in the network. I think we heard that earlier, that there is enough power in the network, but to get enough power to one of our sites to do ultra-fast charging in the size and scope that we need is a real challenge that we need assistance with. And There are different ways of doing that around the globe today, but it's safe to say that that's a slow process that nobody's really conquered just yet.
And a question about if you live in a housing estate, do you have case studies where housing associations bring in EV systems, or are those sort of properties kept out of this?
No, that's a great question. For us, where we're putting in EV car club or car share solutions that just address that issue. So what we can do is we can put in enough car share vehicles there to reduce the amount of vehicle ownership needed on that estate, to reduce the amount of parking that's needed on that estate. And that also helps the electrification of the estate by providing not just charge points for our vehicles, but charge points that are then opened up to other people around that area. So it is something that works very much in hand with local authorities and the development of those estates. But definitely car shares and car club are a big part of that solution.
Thank you. And just finally, someone's suggesting that a try before you buy scheme could be an effective way to encourage electrification of small business fleets. What do you think of that as an idea?
Absolutely. I think one of the things that is causing some delays in this for some people is concerns, either founded or unfounded, in how this electrification journey goes. So an ability to try, an ability to dip your toe in and realise that actually this is a great solution. There may be different things to consider, but overall it's a great solution. I think that's vital to help get people along this journey. Many of our customers fear this idea of an electric vehicle because they don't quite understand it. But as soon as we help them on that journey and we help them try, then in general, I think everybody starts accelerating that journey.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. So now we're going to have a short panel discussion. And Jeremy, as the panel keynote, could I ask you to kick off the discussion by asking a question of one of your fellow panellists, please?
Certainly, thank you, Rachel. Yes, I was keen to pick up on some of the points that were mentioned, Amy, for perhaps you first, in terms of the technologies that are being evaluated for the electrification of trucks, and that comparison that you mentioned between battery electric and hydrogen fuel cell electric vehicles. It sounded like both certainly have a role. What aspects do Volvo Trucks need to consider in terms of the implications for infrastructure that may need to be put in place, and I suppose sort of tying yourselves into one technology or another for particular journeys that may be made, and the investment that might be required in those high-powered chargers for battery electric vehicles or fueling stations for hydrogen?
Yeah, so it's a good question. So definitely we see both technologies as technologies for the future, not either or. Now the focus is on battery electric, so really the focus is on developing that charging infrastructure. Really our conversations today are about kind of small numbers of trucks and generally returning and are being parked up overnight. So overnight charging is quite straightforward. We're not talking about high power demands. But once you start to get into vehicles that aren't sitting overnight, and you're starting to get into vehicles that are perhaps running around the clock and doing 2 shifts, we then get into some of the same challenges we've heard elsewhere around power supply to those sites, and we'll need high-powered charging to make sure that those vehicles can be charged up in a couple of hours so that they can get back out on the road. A truck is bought to do a job. If it's standing still, it's not earning money for that business. So any sort of downtime is lost revenue. So we really need to think about that charging infrastructure and where that's located. And that could be developed on individual operators' sites, but also in the future, I think we'll see models where we'll see shared infrastructure and access being given to other fleets to use infrastructure. And that's the only way I think that will make it work for the future. And then touching on hydrogen, so I think this is a big challenge. We're really at the start of thinking about this infrastructure and how this will work for trucks. and there are a lot of challenges to overcome. You know, the first one is around generating the hydrogen and how we generate that in a sustainable way, but then how we get that to where we need it. We've got some comparisons we can draw with the introduction of LNG trucks, which we've seen kind of good uptake in the market of, but actually restrictions on that uptake when it comes to availability of LNG and that LNG infrastructure. So it's definitely one that we need to focus on in the future for hydrogen and make sure that that infrastructure is there. I see the role for us today is to just look right out into the future and make sure that we're planning for that market and the right infrastructure to be in place at the right time, but equally tackling today's problems first.
Yes, to have that impact as soon as possible in the electrification journey. And Paul, for you, just thinking about I suppose the investments that are needed in order to enable this electrification of transport to occur from a manufacturing facility perspective, what are some of the challenges that Vauxhall is facing in order to take, I suppose, years of investment that have been made into particular combustion technologies and adapt and transition to EVs?
I guess everyone's aware we've just come over a big hurdle with Ellesmere Port. Ellesmere Port plant that's been producing internal combustion engine cars for 60 years. Very old legacy plant, more than 20-acre plant, and that's obviously we announced very recently that's going to become a centre for us for production of electric small van, so a small commercial vehicle. The investments we made 110 million investment, and I mean basically that's not just to bring the product to the plant, because it's also to modernise the plant and compact the plant, because we have a big agenda in terms of carbon neutrality around manufacturing. And a big part of that investment came from reducing the plant size, physical size of the plant, compacting to make the whole process of manufacturing more efficient. So that's the first step. And I think that's a challenge for the industry as a whole. Many of the plants we have in our industry are old legacy plants. So the first step was that. The second is obviously modernisation for the platform and battery assembly. And then there's another challenge we have on top, which is not purely about the manufacturing, that's about sustainable energy. And we are looking now at how we can, both in our plant in Luton, but also in Ellesmere Port, how we can go to more sustainable energy sourcing. So 110 million investment is mainly to drive the introduction of electrification through compaction, through investment on the line in terms of obviously the new platform that's being brought, but also to look at the way that we can use renewable energy to sustain our drive towards carbon neutrality.
Thank you. I'm conscious of the fact that we're very short on time, but Ben, to give you the chance to comment as well from a customer's perspective, you mentioned about the scenario of car clubs and the opportunity to provide electric vehicles to different users. What are you seeing from a customer's requirements perspective that perhaps is a bit new or challenging with the EV revolution?
Yeah, thanks. I think there's many different things that are a challenge for customers as they start using EVs for the first time. Some of it is the vehicles are actually a little bit different to drive or to use in different ways, although that's a hurdle they get over fairly quickly. Charging is a real primary their concern. It's not necessarily range anxiety. They understand the mileage they can do and that it will need to be charged, but access to charging is difficult. And it's not just about a matter of charge points. It's how do they know which charge points are actually up and running, which charge points are available, and primarily on that front, how do they actually pay? Some of us that are more used to this may carry around 20 different charge cards to access whichever charge point happens to be there. There is no interoperability between all of those at the moment, and that's a major obstacle for people who are not as educated on how to use an EV as most people in this room. So we tend to say that our customers shout loudest about those challenges than anything else. They love them once they get used to them, but they need a lot of help to be able to get over those initial barriers.
Thank you.
This point on simplification, I think, is really important. The point you make, I think, is absolutely spot on. The complexity today, anyone who runs an EV, many people in the room obviously driving EVs, this complexity issue is a huge issue that needs to be tackled, and that needs to be tackled at the centre. It cannot come from bottom up.
Yes, you want to just rock up and swipe a card and it all just works. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd just like to give the rest of the panel a final chance to ask any other panellists another question if they'd like to. It's such a great opportunity to have you all here. So if there's anything you'd like to ask any of yourselves, please go ahead. Otherwise, all that's left to say is thank you so much to you all for opening the EV Summit this morning with such excellent insights. And thank you to the audience for the questions. Please do keep those coming in throughout the day. And just before we head off for the first networking session, we'll hear from Cezary Faczewski, our lead partner for the EV Summit from Visa. Cezary is Visa's business development lead for this sector, and Cezary, may I invite you to the stage to say a few words about Visa and their engagement with the e-mobility sector.
Good morning, everyone. It's really exciting to be here in person. I have to say, it's been a while. And on behalf of Visa, I'm really delighted to join the 2021 EV Summit as it returns to its University of Oxford Saïd Business School home for its fourth year. And I understand there are over 2,000 people joining us, both in person and as a global online audience. Visa is proud to be joining this year as a partner of the EV Summit, a platform dedicated to decarbonization in the mobility space. We're also joining you as a company committed to sustainability leadership inside our own walls. We've greened our offices and data centers. We transitioned to 100% of renewable electricity, and we achieved carbon neutrality of our operations. We're also joining you as a company committed to addressing climate change by leveraging our products, services, network, brand, and expertise to drive sustainable commerce and to help enable the transition to the low-carbon economy. Visa is working with our clients to help customers better understand and take action on their own environmental footprint. We're also applying our resources to specific areas such as transit, mobility, travel, and tourism. And given the importance of the mobility will play in the local carbon economy, as part of our efforts, Visa is also supporting digital payments in EV charging space to help address interoperability, security, and seamless customer experience, and to further drive adoption of zero-emission vehicles. Not only the EV Summit is a powerful forum for leaders in e-mobility space, but it's also a very powerful platform. I'm sorry, it's been a while, and I'm super stressed. You can probably hear that. I would be really delighted to meet with you, share our ideas at Visa through the managed introduction platform. So come and meet with us. I will share what we do in Visa and enjoy the rest of the event. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Cezary, and thank you to Visa as the EV Summit's lead partner for 2021. So now we're going to have a break for networking. And for those of you in person today, please head out to the atrium to chat with your fellow delegates. And for the online audience, you're not left out. Please take advantage of the networking tab. Wherever you're joining from, we'll see you back here for the next panel at 11:15.
and you'll understand this, won't you?
Checking you can hear us. Yeah, sorry. Can you hear us now? Excellent. Sorry, we just muted some mics in the room. That's all it was. Anders, are we all right to ask you to rename yourself with capitals, if that's okay? Oh, yeah, that's fine. Yeah, thank you. Just to confirm, you can both hear us and see the stage? Excellent.
Welcome back from the first managed Introductions Network session. I hope you've made some new connections and begun to forge partnerships that will keep e-mobility accelerating. And just a reminder for online delegates to make sure that you use the platform to make and check your meetings. So let's dive straight into the second panel, Electric Passenger Car OEMs, Transitioning Towards Electric Passenger Vehicles, which we're delighted to say is sponsored by charging infrastructure firm Zaptec. Ahead of the panel, first a short video from the panel partner before we hear from the speakers. So, on this panel, we're asking, how can the transition towards electric passenger vehicles be delivered at pace and deliver on net zero goals? Our four speakers who will be answering that question are Anders Tingbo, who is CEO of Zaptec, Alex Smith, Managing Director of Volkswagen Group for the UK, Jonathan Goodman, CEO of Polestar UK and Head of Global Communications for Polestar, and Ashley Andrew, who's Managing Director for Hyundai Motor UK. Thank you all for being with us today. Our opening keynote speaker, and joining us from Norway, the home of EVs, from our panel partner Zaptec, is Zaptec's Chief Executive Officer, Anders Tingbo. Anders is devoted to offering people the critical infrastructure for fueling electric vehicles. He has experienced Zaptec's journey through the electrification of Norway, and he now has his sights set on electrifying Europe with a robust charging infrastructure network. Do remember to keep submitting your questions for Anders and our full roster of speakers today. Anders, please take to the digital stage for your opening thoughts.
Thank you very much for the introduction, and I'm happy to share the Norwegian electric vehicle history that has brought a lot of vehicles, electric and plug-in vehicles, into the Norwegian society. So the story is about the last 5 years. Norway has adopted 400,000 electric vehicles. That's about 20% of all cars in Norway are electrified at the moment. So we have about 2.5 million cars in total. For the first half of this year, 83% of all new car sales in Norway was either plug-in hybrids or fully electric. So petrol and diesel represent only 7% of new car sales in the first half of this year. So this is a little bit about the magnitude of the EV adoption in Norway. But looking into the absolute numbers, Germany has surpassed Norway when it comes to number of vehicles sold. So just in the second quarter of this year, Germany sold 150,000 electric vehicles. So they are the biggest EV country in Europe when you talk in absolute numbers. So why is it so popular with electric vehicles in Norway? Well, we don't have any purchase tax. We have an exemption from 25% VAT. You pay no charges on toll roads and ferries, and you have access to bus lanes. So it's a walk in the park to buy an EV in Norway, and that's also reflected in the numbers. But what we see is that it really works. The average CO2 emissions from all new cars has gone from 135 to 60 grams per kilometer in the period from 2011 to 2019. And that's the same as the EU targets for 2030. So it really works to put political pressure on this sector and electrify the transportation sector. And Norway has been able to do this because we produce a lot of oil and gas. We have high revenues from that sector, and it creates more CO2 emissions to produce oil and gas. But we use some of those revenues to subsidize the transportation sector to reduce the CO2 emissions in that sector. So that's the main story from the political scene in Norway. But what we have seen in the last years is that EV adoption or electric vehicles, in the start, it was for high-income people, but now we have a second-hand market so that most people can afford an EV. And the market has transformed from a subsidy-driven development to a more market-driven development, where you have the car manufacturers launching new electric models, and they sell all their electric cars months and years in advance of the delivery. So going forward, I'm quite sure that the electric vehicle sales in Norway will continue to be strong, even if the subsidies might be lower. And we have a national election coming up now this month, actually. And it might be so that the subsidies will go down, but I'm sure that it will continue despite the kind of incentives that they have put into the politics. And if you look at what are the biggest pain points for having electric vehicles in a society. So if you ask the EV owners a couple of years ago, number one was range anxiety, and the other one was access to charging. And range has increased from 100 kilometers to 300 kilometers plus. The average daily travel distance is 50 kilometers. So the range anxiety has almost gone. And what we see now is that building out the charging infrastructure is the main pain point. So the cities where people buy electric vehicles and populated areas, they will need to build out fast charging, destination charging, and home charging, of course. So people would like to charge at home, but a destination, a large fast charging station is also vital for a high EV adoption. And for UK, where you have a lot of on-street parking, we really believe that on-street parking infrastructure is important for the UK market. And it's also important to say that charging all these vehicles will put a lot of pressure on the grid, and it's necessary that these charging systems will be smart so that you can balance the load between the charging and the load on the grid, so that you can kind of reduce the investments and make everything work better with a smart system. So to sum up, there are costs related to electrification of the transportation sector, but people are very happy with the electric vehicle, and they will never return to combustion engine once they have gone electric, and that's according to the Norwegian experience. So those were the few words I had for the EV adoption story in Norway, and if you have questions, I will be happy to answer.
Thank you very much for that, Anders. We've got a few questions for you. In the UK, the government has recently lowered the plug-in car grant, not increased it. How can we encourage our governments to provide the necessary subsidies in order to help the e-mobility industry grow?
I really believe that when you have kind of car models being offered from the car manufacturers, you can put pressure on the population, either by, like you do in London, where you put a fee on having a combustion engine in the city center, and you can increase what a city center is. So that would be one way to go, and I really believe that you have to put some force also into getting the EV adoption that you want. But I also believe that more positive politics like subsidies and kind of easy access to electric vehicles and charging is of importance because people, they choose themselves, and we have to have a respect for the family that are going to buy a car, and they need to fuel it up easily, and they cannot afford a premium price just to go electric. So it has to be a kind of cooperation between the politics and the people and the car manufacturers.
And who pays for the charging infrastructure in Norway?
So in Norway, we normally people, they own their own apartment or their own house. So people, they prioritize to charge at home. And what we see is that the car is connected about 13 hours, but they only charge 2.5 hours. And they charge about 10 kilowatt hours, and that's about 50 kilometers per day. So it's the most convenient way of charging is at home, and it's also the cheapest way of charging. But along the corridors and the long-haul highways, it's necessary to have fast charging stations to cope with charging when you're on a long-haul trip with your car. So it's not either or, it's more like build out infrastructure where people park their car, or in highways where people travel a lot. That's the main message, I would say, from charging point of view.
Thanks. And just one last question. I'd like to know what you thought of the Will Ferrell advert, which talked about Norway and electric vehicles. Did you think it was helpful?
Yes, I think so.
Thank you. And if you'd like to join us for our panel discussion in a bit, that would be great. So next up, we have Alex Smith, who is Managing Director at Volkswagen Group UK. What fascinates Alex is the ever-increasing pace of change in automotive and how he can help shape that constantly evolving future. In his role as MD of the company that supplies 1 in 5 new cars and vans in the UK, Alex knows he can play a part in accelerating the sustainability of personal mobility, always keeping in mind his kids will hold him to account for how much difference we make today. So do send your questions in for Alex, who I will now invite up to the lectern to speak.
Good morning. Thank you for the very kind introduction, Rachel. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for the invitation to speak today. So, as Managing Director of Volkswagen Group in the UK, I'm responsible for the Volkswagen passenger cars, Volkswagen commercial vehicles, Audi, Seat, Cupra and Skoda brands. As Rachel said in the introduction, we're responsible for approximately 1 in 5 of the car and van sales in the UK. So with a market share of over 20%, we're very aware of the fundamental role that we play and that we can play in the UK's decarbonisation of transport. And Volkswagen Group's global commitment to e-mobility is very clear. We were the first automaker to commit to the aims of the Paris Climate Accord. And here's some big numbers: 73 billion euros invested in capex and R&D in future technologies in the next 5 years. 73 billion euros. 26 million electric vehicles will be built in the first wave by 2030 from 18 e-production locations globally, of which 8 produce vehicles on the MEB electric platform. 1 of our own gigafactories and 5 in partnership in Europe, and 400 million euros invested in European charging infrastructure by 2025, as demonstrated in the UK through our partnership, our highly visible partnership with Tesco in conjunction with Podpoint, our partnership with BP Pulse, and as a shareholder in Ionity. Now, we strongly believe at Volkswagen that the car will continue to account for the majority of individual mobility. And I'd like to talk this morning really about the consumer perspective and the framework conditions that are going to be necessary to accelerate the inevitable and worthwhile transition to electric mobility, because the speed of the transition is the critical point. It's the speed of the transition which is critical here. Now, the UK has set a date of 2030 for the end of sale of pure internal combustion engines. And the Climate Change Committee balanced pathway volume, which was based on assumptions of a phase-out in 2032, suggests that around 11.5 million battery electric vehicles will have been sold by that date, by the 2030 date. So that still means that there will be around 20 million internal combustion engine vehicles on Britain's roads at that point in 2030. 20 million. So there's no time to waste in creating the positive framework to ensure there is an acceleration of electric vehicle adoption. So what are the barriers? Well, I think they've been extensively covered, but I just want to focus on two. And the first barrier that I want to emphasise is one of affordability. Almost 1/3 of the new car market in the UK transacts at a price point of £24,000 or lower. And that's an area of the market that at the moment you won't really find any battery electric vehicles today. Now, in time, of course, this will change, and our unified cell approach will be key in cutting battery cost. But we have to move fast. We have to accelerate this transition. So what can we do in the interim? Well, we've seen the impact, the extremely strong positive impact that taxation incentives have had on stimulating battery electric vehicle uptake in the fleet market, especially for some of the higher priced vehicles where the majority of battery electric vehicle transactions are taking place today. But with private customers where the uptake is significantly lower so far, then the availability of purchase incentives, such as the plug-in car grant, remain absolutely critical in consumer decision-making and consumer motivation. And the key point here is that the speed of the transition to battery electric vehicles that we achieve will depend on the ambition of the appropriate framework conditions to enable that transition to take place. The second barrier that I want to focus on briefly is range anxiety and charging anxiety. Now, the psychological and logistical importance of a reliable, fast, interoperable, transparently priced public charging infrastructure is obvious, it's self-evident, and I'm sure that it's going to be covered many times and very extensively over today and tomorrow. But for 120 years, customers have really not cared about the size of the fuel tank in their car. They've not cared about the range. And the reason for this, of course, is because the precise size of the fuel tank in an internal combustion engine vehicle has very little impact on its price. But battery size and therefore electric vehicle range has a fundamental impact on the price of a battery electric vehicle. And therefore, to maximise affordability, it's absolutely crucial that customers need to select a realistic range. I myself drive an electric vehicle. It has a range of approximately 230 miles. On an average day, I use approximately 60 of those miles. But as a consumer a year ago, when I made the switch to electric, I defaulted to choosing the longest range vehicle that I could possibly obtain. And for 355 days a year, I don't use it. I don't need it. So the consumer's confidence in a reliable, fast public charging infrastructure will enable the consumer to make realistic choices as to the range that they need, boosting affordability and preserving raw materials. Now, Volkswagen Group is fully committed to playing its part in the transition to carbon-free mobility. The speed at which that this is achieved will depend on the ambition that every stakeholder shows in delivering those framework encouraging supportive conditions. Thank you. I'm very pleased to take any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Alex. The questions are rolling in for you. First of all, quite a general question. Is there enough lithium available in the world to meet EV requirements, and how practical is it to keep an uninterrupted supply chain?
I think, obviously, with regard to raw material supply, all manufacturers are working hard on securing the long-term stability of their supply chain.
There are new sources being investigated, and there's a huge amount of research and development going on into minimising the requirement or the required levels of raw materials for the technology that we're developing and providing. So there's, first of all, on the supply side, massive effort going into stability of supply chain over the long term, but also on the R&D side, ensuring that the absolute minimum quantity of raw materials is used.
Thank you. And do you think the future could be wireless charging?
I think, you know, for now, for the next few years, I think it's really important that we look at what we can do now, what has to be done now to accelerate the initial transition to electric vehicles. As I say, the Committee for Climate Change Balanced Pathway suggests 11 to 11.5 million sales by the end of the decade. That's only 1/3 of the vehicles out there. So what can we do now? What can we do practically in order to ensure that the transition is as fast as possible? Well, it is then about building that reliable, fast charging infrastructure that gives consumers confidence that it's a choice that they can make now.
Mm-hmm. And just finally, on the speed of charging, do you think that there's a premium that EV users would pay for fast charging, and would it be as high as fuel is at the moment?
I think that obviously, you know, price is determined by a number of factors. We heard from Anders in his opening remarks to the panel that for those that have home charging, they tend to charge at home in the majority. I think that consumers make logical choices about where to pick up the energy they need at the time that they need it. It would be an obvious statement to suggest that there are certain speeds of charging, certain locations of charging, which are likely to be more expensive than others. But consumers, just as every electric vehicle driver that I speak to, and I speak to many on a daily and a weekly basis, you know, you share the tips and tricks. Everybody finds their own logical way of charging in the way that they need. I think the real key factor is that it has to be so ubiquitous that it stops becoming, I guess, a badge of pride, a badge of intellectual pride to share how you've managed your charging requirement, and it just becomes something that is as easy as replenishing liquid fuel.
Thank you. Yeah, I think speed of charging is probably something we will come back to later, so thank you. Our next speaker, I'm delighted to say, is Jonathan Goodman, the CEO of Polestar UK and Head of Global Communications. Polestar are one of the exhibitors today, so please do take a look at the Polestar 2 here in Oxford at the front of the Saïd Business School, or check out the online exhibition space for those of you engaging with the summit digitally. Jonathan has been in his current role since July last year, after 3 years as Chief Operations Officer for Polestar, charged with overseeing the operational launch of the new standalone electric performance car brand within the Volvo car group. Jonathan, we're very much looking forward to hearing from you. For our online audience, do send in your questions now so we can pose them to Jonathan after his presentation.
Thank you very much, and it's lovely to be here at what is undoubtedly the premier EV event in the UK. And what an exciting time as we transition with increasing velocity towards a zero-emission future. And Polestar are delighted and proud to be part of this transition, a pure electric performance car brand at a time when EVs are in more and more demand. A digital-first, omni-channel, direct-to-consumer brand at the time when the transition towards e-commerce is increasing exponentially. You could argue that we're the right brand at the right time. The transition is in our DNA. As a startup brand that is unencumbered by the constraints of a legacy business, we've been able to capitalise on the rising global demand for electric vehicles as one of only 2 pure EV players on the global market. We're present in 15 countries on 3 continents, and we'll expand this to 30 countries by the end of next year. The factories are built, we've delivered cars for the past 12 months, and we have a portfolio of cars to launch over the coming years. In short, the next few years for Polestar could be summarised in one simple word, which is growth. So the transition is underway, but how do we, in the UK, accelerate it? Well, at Polestar, we don't have the worries that Alex and Ashley have. How do you communicate the merits of electric cars whilst still maintaining 70% sales of petrol vehicles? On the other hand, we also don't enjoy their brand awareness. However, we all share a number of key challenges, and that's what I want to deal with now. And I've just settled on 3 for the moment. Firstly, you've heard it before, and you'll hear it again unashamedly, charging infrastructure. For the UK to hit its stated zero-emission objectives, the single biggest enabler is the urgent need to drastically expand the fast charging network. We are behind the Nordics that we've heard Anders talking about. We're behind Germany, and yet we have a far more aggressive timeline in the UK. We've seen exciting developments at GridServe, at InstaVolt, and we've got great plans from BP and Shell and the other companies, but we need to build more consumer confidence that the charging infrastructure will be there when they need it. The second point is consistency from government. The government has set the timetable. We've heard talk about it, ending the sale of petrol and diesel cars by 2030. Obviously, I am fully in support of this. But now the government also has to set the tone. It must be consistent with its tax and rebate systems and avoid the confusion we saw last year with the unannounced changes to the plug-in grant, which caused great dissatisfaction for customers in their consideration terms. The confusion and anxiety for the consumer is not conducive to accelerating adoption. No manufacturer is looking for free handouts, but consistency and a clear roadmap are crucial if we're going to achieve what is already a compressed timeline. And the third, well, we also have to admit it that we as an industry have a credibility problem. The car industry has a lot to learn. Dieselgate left us all with an undeniable lack of trust in the eyes of the consumer. And we have to use the EVs as an opportunity to rebuild that confidence in the industry. And it's great to see so many EVs being launched, and we applaud the increased focus that this brings, but EVs are the start point, they're not the end game. Their benefits are huge, with cars delivering half the lifetime carbon footprint of the equivalent petrol car if charged with green energy. But there is still a carbon footprint, and we have a responsibility to clean up our supply chain and our manufacturing. At Polestar, we published our life cycle analysis last year and its methodology so that we could be transparent and summarise our footprint in one easy number. We also committed to a climate neutral car by 2030. Now, much work needs to be done, and we're working on it. And we will be completely transparent in our approach throughout the supply chain, and consumers can monitor our progress. But the whole industry needs to follow suit and provide consumers with a simple way to compare the cars. Let's embrace the opportunity that electric cars give us for transparency, and let's rebuild the consumer's trust in our industry. At Polestar, we have sustainability at our core since our inception. EVs give us all the opportunity to come clean. So to summarise, we have all the privilege of working in an industry that has changed many times through its history. And we have once again in an era of incredible transformation. It's tremendous and it's exciting change, an industry that will become ever more electric, increasingly digital, and ever more sustainable. And at Polestar, we're intent on being one of the guiding stars to lead us through this change. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jonathan. Some questions for you. Polestar recently announced plans to build the world's first truly climate neutral car by 2030. Could you give us some detail on specifically how you will eliminate carbon emissions from your supply chain?
Yeah, I mean, it's an absolutely huge challenge, and what we said at the time we announced is we don't have all the answers now. But it goes into every element of the R&D, the materials we're putting into cars, the research we're doing into that, the work we're doing with suppliers of cobalt and lithium, and being able to track how we do that. And I think that that's one of the things that quite often you get asked questions, why, well, what's the answer if you're going to do this by 2030? You have to have the intent, and you have to publish the intent and then be measured against it in order to be credible, I think, in front of the consumer. And that's what we've chosen to do, and we're very proud to do so, and we'll meet that target.
And how could we make EVs more appealing for customers from a financial point of view? How do you encourage customers who are not concerned about the environment, the need to switch to electric, they just need to replace their car?
Well, I think the simple trite answer is that all they need to do is get in and drive one. And as soon as they get in and drive one and feel the incredible acceleration and the joy of driving an electric car, I've not seen too many people get in an electric car and get out and say, no, I don't like that. So I think that whichever manufacturer is there will be very, very proud for them to try it. And I think that once people do, they're immediately converted to it. But then, as I said when I was talking, I think that there is also a role to play, and government has to play it, in having a clear and consistent motivation for people to adopt electric vehicles, especially the private customer. And I think that what we do in the UK, frankly, is not at the same level as we're seeing in other countries. And if the country is serious about the objectives, they also have to give people a reason and an incentive to do it. And I believe that with that, and with the quality of product that every manufacturer is producing, there is going to be huge, huge EV take-up. We're already seeing 1 in 10 cars now being sold as a battery electric vehicle in the UK. And I think that there is enormous potential. And what I do know is every single person that adopts an electric vehicle, you don't see them going back to anything else afterwards.
Thank you. For those online, there's lots of vigorous nodding going on in the audience in agreement with how pleasurable it is to drive an EV. So next, we're delighted to invite Ashley Andrew, who's Managing Director at Hyundai Motor UK. Ashley's experience in the world of automotive spans 25 years, with a clear focus in his role at Hyundai on preparing for a future driven by clean and sustainable mobility solutions. As ever, do get your questions in for Ashley. Ashley, please come and take the floor.
Thank you very much, and good morning to everyone at the EV Summit. And a huge thank you from my behalf to be invited back for the second year. So thank you, Aid. In terms of how we move to the fast adoption of EVs at pace and deliver on our net zero goals, I can only speak on behalf of Hyundai. But the answer relies on 2 fundamentals. The OEM's commitment to bring to market innovative, zero-emission vehicles, and the government's commitment to support the transition through incentives, infrastructure, and clear information. So far this year, we've seen a very sharp rise in the demand for EVs, highlighting the need for the motor industry to adapt quickly, shift towards electrified mobility, and support consumer confidence in choosing the green option. With the lifting of lockdown and opening of showrooms, demand for EVs has increased rapidly by 120% during the first 7 months of the year. Plug-in hybrid sales have also proved incredibly popular, with sales up 153%. We increasingly hear from our dealer network that consumers are looking for alternative fuel vehicles. As an industry, we must embrace this in order to address the impact of climate change. For brands like Hyundai, the foundations for a cleaner future were laid by engineers and designers a long time ago. The brand is now able to offer the industry's most diverse range of alternative fuel vehicles, including hybrid, plug-in hybrid, pure electric, and hydrogen fuel cell vehicles. From this year, every Hyundai product, with just one exception, is electrified in some form. The recent arrival of our Ioniq sub-brand offers a new generation of pure electric models that strengthen our commitment to zero-emission mobility. The Ioniq sub-brand introduces our revolutionary new EGMP, or Electric Global Modular Platform, upon which a range of new innovative battery electric vehicles will be built. The first of these vehicles is our new Ioniq 5, and for those of you here today, you can see it in the foyer outside. The Ioniq 5 arrived in showrooms last month, and it will be followed by the Ioniq 6 and, in 2024, our large SUV, the Ioniq 7. This will strengthen the Ioniq lineup to appeal to a wide range of consumer requirements. By 2025, Hyundai will introduce at least 12 battery electric vehicles, selling 670,000 EVs annually, comprised of 560,000 battery electric vehicles and 110,000 hydrogen fuel cell vehicles. This will make us one of the top 3 manufacturers of EVs in the world. As more consumers migrate to EVs, the expectations and the consumers' expectations of what these cars will offer will inevitably increase. We're tracking these expectations and we're tackling them head on, offering powerful driver performance, increased driving range, enhanced safety, and more interior space for occupants and luggage. Our EGMP platform also enables us to produce the first EVs compatible with both 800-volt and 400-volt chargers, without the need for any additional components or adapters. Customers are able to charge from 10% to 80% in just 18 minutes and travel for more than 62 miles on just a 5-minute charge. Supporting the diverse transportation needs of modern society will require multiple mobility solutions. At present, hydrogen is not seen as a mainstream consideration, but that's certain to change. Hyundai is already a world leader in hydrogen fuel cell electric vehicles, both cars and trucks, and we were the first to commercialize fuel cell electric vehicles in 2013. As the profile of hydrogen grows, we can scale up our production quickly. We're investing in fuel cell production and infrastructure and partnering with pioneering technology companies to ensure we have multiple solutions for zero-emission mobility. We welcome the inclusion of hydrogen in the government's net zero plan, and we look forward to the rollout of the fueling infrastructure and associated incentives. As an industry, we cannot ignore the fact that people still need to be reassured about the benefits of zero-emission mobility, whatever form it might take. Those who live in inner-city flats or rural locations will understandably worry about where they can charge their cars. We share the government's ambition to decarbonise road transport, and as a business, we are fully committed to a future driven by clean and sustainable mobility solutions. At next week's IAA in Munich, Hyundai will share its future company vision, one that will extend zero-emission outlooks to all sectors of mobility, including plans to enable carbon neutrality. So as a business, we're meeting consumer demand with the most diverse range of alternative fuel vehicles on the market, with many more to come. We're investing in infrastructure and working with our network partners to accelerate the uptake of EVs. However, it's crucial that if we are to succeed as an industry, government support needs to provide the necessary incentives, infrastructure and information to encourage mass adoption and help us all deliver a revolution in sustainable mobility as early as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashley, for those insights. Some questions coming in for you. So first of all, how can OEMs work with charge point operators to accelerate the rollout?
Yeah, and I think it has to be a coalition. I mean, Hyundai, we are part of the Ionity partnership Alex mentioned. They're scaling up their charging structure throughout Europe. They've got plans to go faster and introduced more charging network to up to 400 in 2021. That's a coalition initiative with a number of OEMs and Ionity. And the real benefit of it is, as well as a charging infrastructure, it's completely zero-emission energy that's powering it. So people who are adopting and buying EVs want the assurance that it's a clean, zero-emission supply chain.
And a bit about sustainability. Obviously, the battery is a huge part of an electric vehicle. How do you think it's best to sustainably source some of the rare metals like lithium?
Well, I think, as was mentioned in the discussion, I mean, manufacturers have to make sure that their supply chains are sustainable, but also ethical as well. So a huge amount of work's been done in terms of lithium and cobalt to make sure that the sourcing of these materials is ethical and sustainable. But I think, as I said in the presentation, it will be a blended solution. So it's not just going to be battery EVs, fuel cell and hydrogen, as Amy mentioned in the earlier presentation, are going to have a key part to play as blended zero-emission solutions.
Thanks. And just finally, as the first source for face-to-face advice for consumers sometimes on zero-emission mobility at dealerships, how important is education for your staff of the bigger picture of net zero and where we're kind of moving to?
Yeah, absolutely critical, because it's and this is, you know, we've been and all the manufacturers will be doing the same. We've been developing and implementing continual training courses, lots of different methods of delivery from face to face to online, but the information is absolutely key, and it's key about charging infrastructure to overcome range anxiety, which Alex talked about, and just about sharing knowledge between early adopters. But the sales teams' knowledge is absolutely fundamental, because conventionally people were buying their combustion engine vehicles. It would have been one of all and they had a high level of knowledge and confidence. With EVs, it's a new technology, so it's absolutely fundamental. We do everything to support our sales teams and our dealer networks, make sure they are fully informed, fully versed in the product, and very professional in terms of the way they approach consumers.
Thank you. Now it's time for our panellists to ask some questions of one another, make comments on what they said, and we'd like Anders, our keynote panel speaker, to begin the discussion by asking a question to one of your fellow panellists. Anders, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you. And first of all, let me say I'm very glad to be in this panel with such dedicated executives from the car manufacturers. I'm smiling all the time. I was listening to Alex Smith from Volkswagen with the huge commitment, investing over 70 billion euros into this new electric vehicle industry. And at the same time, talking about the price point, the £24,000 for kind of an average price point for a normal volume vehicle in the UK. So my question is, when do you see from your company car models being offered in the car dealership in Volkswagen UK on that price level? And if you need a grant from the government, what size of the grant are you kind of expecting to reach such a price point? Because that's the key thing for the EV adoption in the UK, I believe.
Thanks, Anders. I think that you have to kind of look at this sequentially and address the opportunities in the order in which they present themselves. So at the moment, there is a significant proportion of the available new vehicle market actually where there are plentiful products available from many manufacturers. So realistically, until those products are available at a lower price point, it's important that we make progress with the products that are available today and next year and the year after and over the short term. And speeding that transition is not simply a function of price, it's a function of total cost of ownership, and it's a function of the confidence that consumers have in the supporting ecosystem around them. Let's also remember that certainly in the UK, half of the market roughly is company cars, half of it is private ownership, And the taxation incentives that are in place in the fleet part of the market are actually working really, really well. Very, very, very happy with those, really speeding electric vehicle adoption. But there is the private ownership area, which is in this initial stage of transition lagging behind. And we see in our we see in consumer research that the availability of some government support is available in terms of is important in terms of sending a psychological signal, but it's also very very, very salient in the consumer's mind as a reason to purchase an electric vehicle. Now, politically, anyone with any political awareness will understand that it's a difficult decision for a government to subsidise such a significant purchase for people who tend to be in the higher income brackets anyway. But having said that, the speed of the initial electric vehicle adoption will dictate a point that you made yourself, the liquidity of the used vehicle market for electric vehicles. And therefore, the investment that's made now in the subsidy of new electric vehicles will accelerate the liquidity and availability of used electric vehicles, at which point, as a very important point you made yourself, it then becomes a much more democratized vehicle segment that more people can participate in. So getting liquidity in the part of the market which isn't served by new vehicles at the moment through faster adoption of new vehicles that can be turned into used vehicles is critically important.
Thanks, Jonathan. Do you have any questions you'd like to ask anyone on the panel?
No, I mean, it was one of the points I raised, and it just interests me generally, and I think that we're seeing some fantastic products coming from both Hyundai and the Volkswagen Group. But how do you get that balance? Because you have got your petrol, diesel cars, which are still going to make up the bulk of your sales for the next 2 or 3 years as you transition. How do you, especially transiting via a dealer network where they're selling your whole range, how do you actually tell the electric vehicle story without talking down your other products? I was just intrigued to see how you approach that.
Yeah, I think as I said through the speech, it has to be a blended approach, and you have to go as fast as the consumer is willing to go, and the customer incentives will allow you to go, and the government infrastructure and incentives allow you to go. So, as we mentioned, at the moment, we offer a full solution of technologies. So we'll offer hybrid, we'll offer plug-in hybrid, we offer pure electric, and we offer, as we've said, hydrogen. So if you look at the Switzerland project, where we've got HGVs, that the only emissions that come out of them is water, and that's running very successfully in Switzerland as a zero-emission HGV supply chain. Through the Excellent initiative, it's about having a range of innovation to meet different market and different requirements. As Alex said, the fleet market, the incentives are working well with benefit in kind, zero write-down and no tax on the charging of the vehicles. I think we all agree we want more incentive in terms of the private sector. As Anders said, it's no surprise the scale of increase in Germany when you look at the private sector public money incentives in terms of their plug-in car grant compared to what we have in the UK. So for Hyundai, it's about being innovative across a multiple range of solutions and technologies and providing the market with what it requires at the time it requires it.
Thanks. Anders, I'll just give you the chance if there's anything you look like you might want to say something there.
From our side, I mean, in the beginning, when you start EV adoption in a country, almost, I would say 95% of the people will favor a combustion engine because they're used to this, and all the new stuff and the knowledge level about charging, range. It's a lot of myths out there. So I think it's important for all of us to talk about the facts owning an EV, not so that the myths will kind of be in the way for acquiring EVs. So, I mean, it's a lot of petrol cars being sold in the UK for the coming years, and that's the consumer to decide. And we have to, of course, have attractive price points, charging, and all the parts that we have discussed, but also the right knowledge level. So, I mean, people in the beginning, they think that an electric vehicle is easier to burn or explode than a petrol car, and it's a lot of kind of myths out there. And I think we all need to just talk about the facts and increase the knowledge level also, not only talk about charging and range, etc. So I think that's a reflection from my side.
Thank you very much, and thank you to all our panellists for that fascinating discussion. And we're just going to watch our video, the first video, which we didn't see the first time. Thank you, and with that, it's time for networking and a lunch break. So we hope you will keep making connections with fellow delegates. And just a note for those online looking to make meetings. There's been some timing glitches, but you can make meetings. You get notifications in your email. And so please do check those so that you don't miss the meetings. And here in Oxford, we'll be back with the afternoon panel sessions at 1:15.